Please turn off your telephones. I do want to welcome you. My name is Claudia McCullough, and I am director of the Jackson Family Center for Ethics and Values. One of our missions in our center is to bring, that's not good. One of our missions in our center is to bring to campus a world-renowned, actually we didn't know we were going to get a world-renowned, but an ethics speaker every year so that you can share with us and we can learn together. The philosophy program at Coastal is underpinned by ethics studies, and the Jackson Center sees this as our mission to further these studies. And so I have explained to Dr. Reagan that he's our very first. We shared last year, but he's our very first, our own, and our very own. Although I must give credit to the Office of Student Activities and Leadership. We received a grant from that office in order to help us bring Dr. Reagan to campus. Now, we have decided to pass out his bio. Frankly, if I introduce you by going over his bio, we'd be here to 6 o'clock before he got to start his talk because he's done so much. So we want you to keep his bio as a treasure. We also want to tell you that this very kind man has agreed to bring some of his books to campus. And the Jackson Scholars will be out in the lobby selling the books. He has agreed to let us buy them for $12, a steal. And he also tells me that he will wander out there and perhaps we can get him to autograph some. Do we have good news, Timmy? Maybe. We might have good news here. While Timmy's trying to see if we've got good news, I do want to introduce Dr. Reagan this way instead of his bio. I will tell you that when I thought about inviting Dr. Reagan to campus, my friend over here, Dr. Dan Abel, head of the Center for Sustainability, I called him because he is an environmental ethicist himself, and I said, what do you think? And Dan said, you're shooting a little high. And I said, well, all he can say is no. So I got on my computer and rashly invited Dr. Tom Reagan to campus. But my anecdote here is, for those of you who've been in my classes, you know that I jump up and down and lecture and say his name is Reagan, not Reagan. His name is Reagan, not Reagan. And it's a mantra, I make people repeat it. And so I sent him this email and he very kindly answered me back. And as I scroll down to look at my email, dear Dr. Reagan, I was horrified. So I sent him a letter, mea culpa, I'm so sorry, I apologize for all of that, I didn't mean to do that. Here is what a nice man Dr. Reagan is. He sent me back an email and he said, please don't worry about it because it happens all the time. And to tell you the truth, my wife's name is Nancy. And with that, Nancy, if you would mind at least holding your hand up back there, we are honored to also have Nancy Reagan in our audience. Do we think this is going to work, Timmy? Oh, so magic occurs in the world of technology one more time. After Dr. Reagan's talk, we might have some time for questions and answers, but we also can, after the questions and answers, we'll meet you in the lobby and we'll look at his book together. I thank you for sharing this incredible adventure with us. I know that I'm going to learn as much as you are. Please help me welcome Dr. Tom Reagan.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and to the Jackson Family Center for Ethics and Values, and to Jason Fischel for all the work that has gone into making this visit possible. My wife and I, and it's true, I am married to Nancy Reagan, my wife and I are just thrilled to be here. And thanks especially to the people who have tried to figure out this technology this afternoon. I hope it works. And let me say this, I know that all of you have many other things you could be doing at this time. And so for me, it's always, I accept your gift of your time for being here. And I'm very grateful for you for sharing that part of your life with me. So let's just see if this is going to work for us. I think so. So the title of my talk is Animal Rights, Environmental Wrongs. And if you see the web page there at the bottom, I encourage you to jot that down because there's a vast amount of resources that are relevant to the topics I'll be talking about. And I obviously can't cover that, but the website I think is worth spending some time with, and I'll show it to you at the end of the talk as well. I want to ask us to consider two main questions. Can you hear me, by the way? Is that okay? All right. I'd like to ask you to consider with me two main questions. One is the question, do any animals have rights? And the second question is, is the environment ever wronged when we wrong them? That is, when we wrong animals. When we do something to animals, does the environment ever have to pay some of the consequences of our wrong conduct? And what we know from the start, of course, is that we are not going to be able to answer these questions by consulting the media. If we go watch Fox News, or if we read the New York Times or Time magazine or something, they're not going to be able to answer the questions about whether animals have rights or whether the environment is ever wronged. And we also know that opinion polls are insufficient to do this. All that opinion polls can tell us, all that the Gallup poll can tell us, for example, is the percentage of people who think one way or another. For example, there's a significant majority, somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of the American people who think that animals should not be used in cosmetic testing. And that's a very important statistic. But that doesn't tell us whether the 85% think truly, and it certainly doesn't help us answer the question of whether animals have rights. Similarly, if we just say, well, we'll just go and think about how we've been brought up, what we've been taught when it comes to animals and the environment, and we'll find our answers there, but just a moment's reflection tells us that that's not going to work either. If people accepted how they were taught, women would still not have the vote, they still couldn't own property, they couldn't still file for divorce, they couldn't have child custody. We don't, in other areas, think that all we have to do is, well, let's just take our traditions and that's how we'll find the answer. And this is no exceptional case either. What we know is this, that when we're confronted with important questions like the ones that we're going to be considering about animal rights and environmental wrongs, the only way that we're going to be able to answer these questions in a modestly satisfactory way is for us to think independently and critically about it. And that is the invitation of philosophy. Philosophy offers an invitation to all of us. I spent my life as a philosopher. I live and breathe the subject. And the reason I was attracted to it is because of the very things I'm going to talk about right now. And that is, philosophy says, what other subject says this? Chemistry doesn't say this. Accounting doesn't say this. History doesn't say this. Think for yourself, philosophy says. We're not encouraged to think for ourselves in other disciplines, but we must use logic, and we must be factually informed, and we must do our best to rid ourselves from prejudice. And if we satisfy those conditions, then that's the invitation of philosophy. And the purpose of my remarks, rather than to persuade anybody that animals have rights or persuade anybody that the environment is wrong, I don't think I'm a Billy Sunday person who's going to cause conversion experiences amongst the people gathered here. The purpose of my remarks really is to extend the invitation of philosophy and to encourage people when they leave here to continue to think for ourselves about these and other related issues. So that's the purpose of my remarks, to extend the invitation. I want to begin by making three general observations about rights. And the first has to do with the role of rights. What role do rights play in our moral thinking? And I'll be talking about moral rights throughout, leaving the issue of legal rights for another venue. But our moral rights protect our most important goods. They protect our life, our body, our liberty. Our rights limit freedom. My rights, your rights limit my freedom, my rights limit yours. Another way to think about it is this way, is my freedom ends where your rights begin, and vice versa. Your freedom ends where my life begins. And so in this sense then, when we're talking about rights, we can think of them as invisible no trespassing signs. that say to the rest of the world, look, this body already is occupied. It already belongs to somebody. You are not at liberty. You are not free to crush my organs or to break my bones or to blind my eyes as you please. No trespassing. And it says as well, you are not free. You are not at liberty to steal my freedom from me or to take my life as you please. So as I say, the first thing about rights is the role they play in protecting our most important goods. The second thing is rights have great power in our moral thinking. Any serious advocate of human rights, and I regard myself as an advocate of human rights, and I would not be an advocate of animal rights if I had not first been an advocate of human rights. Any serious advocate of human rights thinks, look, respect for our rights, those protections that we have, take precedence over other important values. Respect for our rights are like trump in a game like bridge. And I know many of you probably don't play bridge anymore, but bridge goes like this. You can imagine somebody playing cards here. Somebody plays the queen of spades, somebody plays the king of spades, somebody plays the ace of spades. I'm the last player, and I have no spades, but I do have the two of diamonds. If the two of diamonds is the trump suit in this particular hand of bridge, that little two of diamonds beats the queen of spades. And it beats the king of spades. And it beats the ace of spades. That's how powerful the trump suit is in a game like bridge. The smallest card in the trump suit beats the biggest cards in all the other suits. Well, rights are like that. If we think about other important goods like social custom or personal benefit or the public good, they're very important moral considerations. It's very important that we honor customs and that we advance our own good and that we advance the public good, but never at the expense of the violation of individual rights. That's what this whole country is founded upon, this idea of the power of the rights of the individual, the few against the many. So that, for example, if somebody says, here we have a social custom, it's called slavery. And we've had it for a long time. And so it must be fine. And we say, as advocates of human rights, no, it's not fine. Not at the expense of the violation of individual rights will this custom continue. Or somebody says, look, personal benefit. When Cain slew Abel, he thought he was getting ahead in the world. You know, it's a pretty good thing for me. But that's not a sufficiently good reason to violate the right to life of your brother or of anybody for that matter. And when it comes to the public good, by all means, let's advance the public good. By all means. Let's make education available to all. Let's make affordable health care available to all. Let's make other important social goods available to the many rather than to the few. But not at the price of violating the rights of the few, of the individual. For example, the history of biomedical research is full of examples where researchers have conducted their experiments on orphans and children, on poor women, on the indigent in general, on military personnel, on prisoners. In other words, on people without power, with people who had no ability to stand up and say no to those who were conducting the experiments. All in the name of advancing the public good. All in the name of advancing understanding of disease. All in the name of curing those who are sick. But no serious advocate of human rights is going to say it's fine to do research on unconsenting, unknowing, uninformed orphans or mental patients. No one's going to accept that as a way of advancing the public good. The rights of the individual trump the source, the attempt to advance the public good. And the last and third thing about rights to this, that they're equal. You kind of have a picture of my rights. Imagine those represents the rights, my rights. Well, that's your rights too. When it comes to rights, we're equal. When it comes to other things, we're not. I mean, I know some of you have great ability in calculus and advanced physics and in music and the like. And so in that respect, you're not my equal, that's for sure. You know, you're somebody else altogether. But when it comes to what it is that makes us equal as human beings, it's the possession of these fundamental rights, rights to protect our body and our life and our liberty. And so, we ask the question, do any animals have rights? Do any animals have, I'm not saying do we recognize it, do public opinions polls say it, do we find it in the news and the media, but when we think independently about the issue, do we have any reason to think that they have the same set of protections or some of the set of protections that we have? And that respect for their rights take priority over other kinds of considerations. And that in that respect they are, though we differ in many ways from them, that they and we are equal. That's what we're asking when we're asking this question. And what we know is this, that we're going to have to face various kinds of questions. Some are going to be factual questions. And they're going to say, factual questions say, look, what is the case? What's true as a matter of fact? And we're also going to have to ask what I call foundational questions. And foundational questions ask, who has rights and why? And we'll see these two questions are intimately related to one another. So we ask the factual questions, and the factual questions, I think, are two in number as well. And the first is this. Here are all these other animals in the world. All these other animals in the world. Are any of them like us physiologically? I mean, for example, we have sense organs. You know, we have eyes and ears and taste and touch and so on. Are any other animals like that? Let you think for that for a minute. You say, well, what about organs? I mean, we have kidneys and lungs and livers and any other animal? Well, and then we say, well, how about a central nervous system and a spinal cord and a brain? Any other animals like us in those respects as well? And the answer, I think, oops, sorry, I did that wrong. I think you'll agree with me, is sure, mammals and birds are like us in those respects. And maybe others. You know, some people say, what about fish and so on? There are going to be all these questions about line drawing issues that are very important. But when it comes to stark, in-your-face physiological similarities, there's no question that we're not unique. There's no question that there are literally billions of other animals that resemble us when it comes to these structural considerations. Second question is, are there any other animals who resemble us psychologically? Do they have a mental life? Or are they just, you know, automaton walking around in fur or feather and fin? Or is there somebody there? Is there something going on behind those eyes of animals? Is there a mental life, a psychology there? And I personally think the answer to that is yeah. And I know anyone in this room who has a dog or cat will agree with me. I mean, none of us who share our life with companion animals thinks that nothing's going on behind those eyes. Every one of us thinks there's a complicated somebody behind those eyes, not just a, you know, non-thinking, unconscious something. And in fact, I always think that Darwin is a good source for things like this because I think he was such a good student of animals. And what he says, he's talking here about mammals, and he writes that the minds of these animals differs from ours in degree and not in kind, he says. And I'll tell you what I think he means by this. I think he means that they remember some things, like your cat and your dog. They remember some things. And other animals, like Darwin says, other mammals remember some things. But they don't remember anything about the Peloponnesian War. You know, their memory just doesn't reach that far back. And they expect some things too. They have some expectations about the future. But they don't have any plans for the fall. You know, they haven't thought anything about what am I going to do in the fall. And so this is what Darwin means when he says their minds differ from ours in degree and not in kind. It's not that they don't remember anything, it's just that we remember more. It's not that they don't expect anything, it's just that we expect more. So there's a difference in degree, but not a difference in kind. And Darwin goes on to write this. He says that Darwin believes that these animals experience, he says, to a greater or lesser extent, anxiety, grief, dejection, despair, joy, love, tender feelings, devotion, ill temper, sulkiness, determination, hatred, anger, disdain, contempt, disgust, guilt, pride, helplessness, patience, surprise, astonishment, fear, horror, shame, shyness, and modesty. He says they have that range of mentation he finds when he studies them with an unbiased eye. when he looks them in the eyes, so to speak. So we ask, are any animals like us psychologically? I think there are. I think there are a lot of us, a lot of them are really complicated creatures psychologically. And they're what I call in my work subjects of life. So we just don't have any word that refers to us and them at the same time when we're trying to talk this way. They're subjects of a life, meaning that they're in the world, they're aware of the world, they're aware of what happens to them, and what happens to them matters to them. And in this fundamental respect, they are just like you and just like me. And we, in this fundamental respect, they are just like us. Now, there are these foundational questions that we ask, and this, remember, is who has rights and why? And the history of philosophy is full of possible answers to this. One possibility is only those who are morally responsible. Only those who can take moral responsibility for their behavior have rights. And see, if this is true, then animals look like they're out of the picture. Because it's not like even if you have a misbehaving dog, it's not like the dog is sitting around thinking, well, should I do something wrong or should I do something right? And it's not like they're thinking at that level, even though we sometimes have the suspicion that they might be. But the point is that then we say, well, porpoises and penguins and parrots and pigs don't qualify because they're not morally responsible. But there's just a little problem with this. Actually, there are many problems with it. I have a 1-year-old grandson, and he is all boy, if you know what I mean. I mean, he's just recently walking. And if he can get his hands on something, it's in trouble. It's going to be torn up, broken, whatever. That's just the way he is. Do I think that he's sitting around saying, should I do something right or wrong here, and break this vase, or spill this liquid, or set fire to the cat? No, I don't think that he is sitting around thinking about things like this. But I don't say, well, therefore, he doesn't have any rights. Therefore, he's not protected against invasions of his body. I don't say, well, go ahead and break his bones then. He's not morally responsible. We don't think that. For a minute do we think that. And see, then you can't, remember, philosophy says, well, we have to be logical. And what this means in this case is, well, we can't set a different standard for animals than we set for human beings. We can't say all animals have to be morally responsible, but not all humans. That's having a double standard. And that's not overcoming prejudice again. The idea is you have to be self-aware. A lot of philosophers have made this argument. Not only have to be in the world, aware of what happens to you, and what happens to you matters to you, you have to know you're in the world. You have to have your own existence as an object of your consciousness. And so the idea then, see, people say, well, that's the thing about dogs and cats and porpoises and pigs. They're aware of all this stuff, but they're not aware that they're in the world. Therefore, they don't have rights. So that's where the argument goes. Well, first, I can tell you there's a lot of literature on this, and I encourage you to look into it. There are a lot of people who have made arguments that animals are self-aware. Again, not to the degree that we are, but they are to some degree self-aware. That's certainly my position. But the point is, even if this was the basis for rights, we say, there's my grandson again. You think he knows he's in the world? I don't know. I don't think so. He hasn't come to that kind of cognition yet. He knows there's a lot of stuff to destroy, but it's not clear that he knows that he's in the world destroying it, if you know what I mean. It's just not clear that he's that sort of a being. Then there's the idea, well, you have to have immortal souls to have rights. And it just so happens, I don't know how this works out, just so happens that all humans have them and nobody else does. And so if you take that position, it just so happens that all human beings have them, nobody else does, then of course we say, go back to, well, animals don't have rights then. They don't have that set of protections. Respecting their rights doesn't trump other considerations. There's no equality. They're just not in the same ballpark. Well, this is a hard issue, obviously, and a contentious one, and a divisive one. But let me tell you anyhow how I think about it. I hope I have a soul. I do. I think it'd be so great. It's so great, after you die, to go on and figure out what's going on, learn more things after your body dies. So I profoundly hope I have one. And same for you. I hope you do as well. But see, I don't see how our having a soul has any bearing on our having rights. In other words, our having a soul makes a difference about what happens after our body dies. If we have one, we continue to live. If we don't, we die. We're annihilated. But what does that have to do with how we should be treated while we're alive? And as I say, that has a logical implication about what happens after we die, but I don't see the logical connection with what happens while our moral status while we're alive. But suppose I'm mistaken about that. Think about this. And here I'm borrowing from other thinkers. The name C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, one of the most important, influential Christian theologians of the 20th century. Lewis makes this argument. He turns this argument on its head. He says, I don't think animals have souls. Therefore, I don't think we should eat them or wear them or experiment on them. What do you mean? I mean, if they don't... So because, see, if we give them a miserable life when they're alive, and then we kill them, then there's nothing for them in the future. There's no possibility of recompense in the future. There's no possibility of compensation in the future. Precisely because they don't have souls, we should make sure that their life is as long as good as it can be. Precisely because they don't have souls, he says. We should protect them and not let our interest override their interest. Because we're going to live, and they're not. Here's a possibility. All and only those who are subjects of life have rights. Maybe that's the answer to our foundational question. And of course, now, if that's the answer to our foundational question, then all those mammals we've been talking about, birds and the like, all those animals that Darwin talked about have rights, should be protected, just as we think we should be. People will say that, well, look, they lack rights because they're not human beings after all. I mean, a cow is not a human being. Well, that's true. A cow is not a human being. But there's an idea of what's called begging the question. I mean, the question at issue is it true that all and only human beings have rights? And you say, well, cows are not human beings, and therefore they don't have rights. You say, no. You haven't addressed the question. What's the basis of thinking that only human beings have rights? And you don't answer that question by saying a cow is not a human being. Or somebody says they don't understand rights, and they don't. I mean, my wife Nancy and I have shared our life with cats and dogs over the years, and we've talked to them about rights, and it's pretty clear they don't understand what we're talking about. And I'm sure you've had those conversations too. But the point is this, see, I hate to go back to my grandson, but I mean, there he is. I mean, he doesn't understand rights. We don't say, oh, well, then let's crush his organs and, blind his eyes. We don't say anything like that at all. Where they don't respect our rights, and it's true, if you're out on the Serengeti plain and the lion is hungry, then the lion's looking for you. I mean, it's not like no point saying, try the salad bar. I mean, it's just, you're in the range of that lion. And so there is a sense in which, of course, they don't respect our rights. But as I said before, there are lots of human beings who don't respect our rights, in whose case we don't say, well, therefore they don't have rights. And of course, then there's always this idea that they are under our dominion. And I mean, I'm not opposed to thinking this way. I'm not opposed to the biblical way of thinking that God gave us dominion. As it says in Genesis, God gave us dominion. But if you read the opening chapters of Genesis, it's pretty clear what dominion means. It doesn't mean put your boot in their face. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean dominate. What it means is be as loving and caring to what God has created as God was loving and caring and creating it. Image God. You are in the image of God. We are in the image of God. We're to be as loving towards God's creation as God was in creating it. And that's why, in fact, if you go back and look at it, in Genesis, this is the first chapter, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, in paradise, you know what? They don't eat animals. They don't wear animals. They don't have animals doing tricks, performing tricks. They're not shooting animals or competing with animals. They're not using the animals as tools. They live in harmony with animals. That's the whole picture that you get there. So if that's the kind of dominion that we're talking about, a loving, compassionate caretaker, guardianship, stewardship dominion, then that's no reason for thinking that animals don't have rights. So, let me just remind you before going on to the second question, the practical implications of what I'm suggesting here. Practical implications, rights are trump, remember. And that means that we can't justify injuring or killing animals because we benefit, or because it's customary, or because it's a tradition, or because it's in our self-interest. You know, those sorts of reasons aren't sufficiently good reasons for violating somebody's rights, including animals. And this way of thinking, which is the animal rights way of thinking, this is how you say, well, what do animal rights people think? Well, this is what's coming out of our animal consciousnness. We're saying, look, that applies to the food we eat, the clothes we wear, how we learn, and what we do for fun or entertainment. This applies to a rich selection of how we live our daily life and why we live our daily life. So I would say this then, I hope you can see then, it's just not some abstract or theoretical question that we're asking when we say, do animals have rights? Oh no, it's just fraught with practical significance. It just flows down to every detail of our day-to-day life. We have to rethink it. We have to learn how to live differently in the world if we come to this position. And so we come in, they say to a case study. And I want to say something about hog farming in North Carolina. You may know about hog farming in North Carolina. We rank second in hog production, second only to Iowa. In the late 80s, 2.6 million, now over 10 million hogs are produced. It's a billion-dollar industry. Actually, it's a $2 billion industry. I should have corrected that. In the mid-80s, there were 15,000 hog farms, and today there are 2,400. Now, think about that. Think about the numbers there. Think about the numbers there. The 10 million compared to 2.6 million, 2,400 farms compared to 15,000 farms. What's happened, of course, is the small hog farmer has gone out of business. I mean, those figures tell you that. The small hog farmer has gone out of business. And what we have now are these large farms we're talking about, that 90% of which are east in North Carolina, east of Interstate 95. They're in eastern North Carolina. Now, when we think about a farm, at least this is the way my experiences tells me, when people think about a farm, they say, oh yeah, it's such an idyllic place, you know. It's like straight out of the Wizard of Oz, you know, with Annie Ann, and everybody's having a great time, and the chickens are dust bathing, and they're making nests, and the pigs are wallowing in the mud, and the cows are in the pastures. Everybody's having a good time. And we think about hog farm, we think, oh, they're such cute little creatures. And we all remember Babe, of course, who is smarter than any one of us will ever be, and courageous as well. So we have this kind of idyllic picture of farms in general, and hog farms in particular. But in fact, this is what a hog farm looks like. I mean, it is a vast complex of buildings, or take a look at this one, a vast complex of buildings. And that water out there is a lagoon, and I want to talk something more about that lagoon later. That looks like a factory more than a farm. And that's what we're called. They're called factory farms, because here animals have been brought indoors and raised intensively. And this is, I'll just read a bit from Empty Cages here, if I may. And I want to read from by a man by the name of Matthew Scully. Matthew Scully is a former speechwriter of George W. Bush, so hardly a wild-eyed radical person. And Scully went to a hog farm in North Carolina. And these are breeder sows. And these animals are about 400 pounds. And as you can see, they live in an immobilized life. They're between those bars are about 2 feet wide. And they live that life for about 4 years. And their job is to produce pigs, that go to market. And sometimes, as in this case, this production, you can see there's the rear part of the body is not confined, but at the same time they have no ability to move, to turn around even. And as I say, they live that way for 4 years. And Scully says he goes and he looks in this hog operation, and this is what he finds when he looks at the animals. He says sores, tumors, ulcers, pus pockets, lesions, cysts, bruises, torn ears, swollen legs everywhere, roaring, groaning, frenzied chewing on bars and chains, stereotypical vacuum chewing on nothing at all, stereotypical rooting and nest building with imaginary straw, and social defeat. Lots of it. Every third or fourth stall, some completely broken being you know is alive only because she blinks and stares up at you, dead to the world, except as heaps of flesh. 4 years they live like that. These are the piglets that are produced and they're heading for slaughter. And these mega farms, again, thousands of them, tens of thousands of them produced like this. Most spend 4 to 6 months of their life standing and sleeping on surfaces of wire mesh when they are born, and on metal or concrete slats soon thereafter. Foot and leg injuries, as well as skin abrasions and bruises, are standard and go untreated. Dysentery, cholera, and trichinosis are common. Because of the dust and dander and ammonia that fill the air, most hogs suffer from respiratory disease. For example, it is estimated that 70% of them have pneumonia at slaughter. 70% have pneumonia at slaughter. Well, from an animal rights perspective, it'll come as no surprise. From an animal rights perspective, the judgment we would make is that hog farming is wrong. The judgment we would make is that it ought to stop. And the judgment we would make is that we ought to stop supporting it. We ought to stop eating the products of that kind of barbarity. But there's more to this story, it seems to me, and this is where we come to the second question. Is the environment ever wrong when we wrong animals? Is there some connection between what we're doing inside those factory farms and what happens outside in the world at large? And remember, I said to you, these factory farms are just massive, and they come in and what they do is they just clear fell forests in rural areas, and something's got to happen to all that waste. If you're producing 10 million hogs a year, they're not sitting around fasting, they're eating. And that means they're excreting too. And that's all that waste has to go somewhere. Well, what they do in these hog farms is here's a lagoon that's under construction. What they do in the hog farms is they pour all that waste, all the waste from underneath those stalls where those animals are. All that waste gets collected and it gets poured into these lagoons. Now, everybody knew that this was an accident or a train wreck waiting to happen. Think of it that way. Something ain't right here. Something's got to give here. And what happened was this. On September the 15th, 1999, Hurricane Floyd made landfall in eastern North Carolina. Just came roaring, Category 4. People said a 500-year event, It just came roaring in there. And this was after a tropical depression had already dumped 12 inches of rain on North Carolina. And so here you have this massive hurricane comes with the streams and the ponds and the creeks already overflowing because of the tropical depression. Now you have all this water coming, and what happens is absolutely predictable. Eastern North Carolina is just flooded. It's just one enormous flood. And it wasn't good for the animals. These are pigs that never made it out. There were 150,000 turkeys, hundreds of thousands of chickens who drowned, tens and tens and tens of thousands of pigs who drowned. Some got out. I don't know how, who goes, and they tried to make it on their own. A few got rescued. a very few got rescued. Most just died in the flood. But that wasn't the only destruction. Remember those lagoons? When that waters came, they were no respecters of those lagoons. That water just flowed into those lagoons. And when it flowed into those lagoons, it just took what was in those lagoons out with it. They breached the lagoons. They inundated the lagoons. And you can just see all that waste going downstream from eastern North Carolina, and especially heading for the Neuse River. You can see the discoloration shows you the waste that's just collected there. And here we see what it ends up when the Neuse River empties into Pimlico Sound at just north of here. So what happens? What happens is this. There are environmental consequences to this. Loss of life, loss of habitat, loss of diversity, loss of sustainability. This is like a weapon of mass destruction on eastern North Carolina, on the biology and ecology of eastern North Carolina. People might say, look, we're not responsible for this. There's nothing wrong with destroying life and habitat and diversity. There's just nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the way we do the environment like this. Now, there may be somebody in this room who thinks this, but my guess is there are very few. There's something wrong. We may not know how or to explicate it, but there's something wrong when we're destroying the natural world like this. It's not a good thing. And somebody might say, well, look, we didn't do it. It was Hurricane Floyd who did it, after all. We didn't cause all that loss of life. Hundreds of millions of fish and other forms of marine life just destroyed by the hog waste that came rolling down the rivers and streams and ponds. Just decimated by it. We didn't do it. Hurricane Floyd did. Well, in a sense, that's true. But Hurricane Floyd didn't build mega farms in the floodplain. That was the hog industry that did that. So as I said at the outset, there are two main questions that I wanted to explore with all of you. And the first is this question about, do any animals have rights? And I've given you my Cliff Notes version of how you might get to the position where you get to the conclusion, yeah, they do. There are lots of them that do have rights. And there's a second question, of course, is the environment ever wrong when we wrong animals? And I think sometimes the answer to that question is yes. And the case study of the North Carolina hog industry and Hurricane Floyd is an example, I think, of that. But what we know is when it comes to those two questions, we know that we're not going to find answers in the media, and we're not going to find them in opinion polls, and we're not going to find them in unexamined traditions. We're only going to find them by thinking independently. And that, as I said, is the invitation to philosophy. Philosophy's invitation is to think for ourselves, but using logic and being factually informed and freeing ourselves from prejudice. And so again, with thanks to everyone associated with the Jackson Center, Claudia and Jason, and again for all of you for your gift of time, sharing time with me today, I end my remarks by saying the purpose of my being here is to extend that invitation. Thank you very much.
So take advantage of having a wonderful mind up here with this invitation on the stage.
Can you repeat
Sometimes
that
I pay
question?
their vet bills, I feed these cats. There are only two. I find homes for them when I can.
Right.
Whenever I can get an animal to save our cats to place them, I do that. Save our cats helps me a whole lot.
Right.
But it still remains, I have two there that are, they don't bother anyone. They're poor little things, Buddy and Hobo, they're there. They come at night. I put food under my car for them. What are their rights?
Mhm. Well, I think the thing about companion animals is this. I mean, companion animals are like refugees. And what I mean is, like, if you're a political refugee, you don't have any home anymore. You're kind of wandering. You're wandering. But you don't belong here, you don't belong there. You're a refugee. And with companion animals, they're like refugees, it seems to me, because in a way, see, they don't belong in the wild. They're not. If you say, if I have like a Pekingese, and I say my Pekingese, and say, okay, off you go, drop the Pekingese in the middle of some forest or something. I mean, that's a terrible thing to do. That animal doesn't belong in the wild like that. At the same time, though, it seems pretty clear that like if I've got like a Saint Bernard, doesn't belong in my apartment either. I mean, it's just not a suitable environment for a dog. So they're like refugees. They're caught between the wild on the one hand and domesticity, our life on the other. And the best thing, the only thing, my take on it is this, that if we do have companion animals, then we have an enormous obligation, a strenuous obligation, to provide them with the best possible life that they can have under those refugee circumstances. And that means seeing that they get plenty of opportunities to exercise and get an opportunity to express their nature, who they are, as best we can, imperfect creatures that we are in an imperfect world. So their rights is we owe it to them to give them the best life they can. We can, excuse me.
What are their legal rights?
As I said, let me ask you, I could talk to you about that afterwards if you don't mind, and I'll take another question.
Ray?
Do you have any problem with the analogy between infants and children and animals?
Uh-huh.
For example, if I were a farmer and I had a pig to kill, I'd kill that pig, but it would never occur to me that I'm killing that pig because he can't think morally.
Uh-huh.
But I would never consider killing my grandchild. And I know that the animal rights movement has often been accused of building its case on false analogies like that, and especially you and Peter Singer. I'm sorry to single you out, but that's been spotted as a weakness in the argument.
Oh, I don't see why it's a false analogy. The point is, if we don't determine what is morally right and morally wrong by asking a hog farmer what he does and what he doesn't do. I'm sorry. I mean, he's any more than you would find out by asking me what I do and what I don't do. It's a question of the basis for acting in one way and not acting in the other. So it's not simply a question of asking the farmer. It's a question of looking for some justification or explanation as to why we behave one way in this case and another way in that case.
Yes.
You mentioned the issue of having moral responsibility animals and that they don't have rights to back the statement that they're not morally responsible. Well, how can that statement be true if animals as well as children are punished? You know the difference between right and wrong, doesn't that play a part?
I'm sorry, if animals and children are...
Punished. Everybody knows between right and wrong, doesn't that play a part in what is morally responsible? You know the difference between what is right and wrong.
Yeah, well, see if I understand you. What I'm saying is this, that some people want to say, and good thinkers want to say, that in order to have rights, you have to be a morally responsible agent. And if that's the case, then it looks like it's not going to be very good for animals. It's going to be hard to make the case that they're morally responsible. Some people argue that way, but it's going to be hard to make that case. And all I'm saying is that there are lots of human beings who are not morally responsible. Lots of human beings who don't know the difference between right and wrong. Lots of human beings who have never even thought about right and wrong. We don't say, in their case, well, therefore they don't have any rights. We don't say that. And we don't say that like in the case of my grandson. We don't say, well, that means that we can crush his organs and blind him, in other words, invade or injure his body because he is not morally responsible. We don't think that way. So all I'm saying is that you can't have a double standard. You can't say, well, animals have to meet that standard or else they're out, but human beings don't have to meet that standard and they're in. That's the double standard.
If we were to say ground the rights in a level of self-awareness, what level of self-awareness would say an animal have to possess in order to be the equivalent of, or in order to be being able to have rights?
Yeah, that's a good question. See, yeah, the question has to do with self-awareness, and the question is, if you use that as a criterion for having rights, then what degree of self-awareness would animals have to have in order to meet that standard? I think that's accurate. And to a large extent, it's going to depend upon the thinker, I think. In other words, I don't think there's just one answer to the question. If, for example, you mean by this, you have to not only be aware of aware of the world, aware of what happens to it, but also aware that you're in the world and aware that you're mortal, aware that this being that you're aware of is going to die. Then, if that's the requirement, then you'd have to say animals have to satisfy that requirement. They have to not only know that they're in the world, that is, be self-aware, but they have to know that they're going to die. And then the question would be, do any animals know that? But then, on the other hand, there might be somebody who would say they don't have to know that they're mortal. They don't have to know that they're going to die. They just have to know that they're in the world, that the dog has to know that the dog is different than the couch. Has to be self-aware like that. See, that's why I think animals are self-aware. I mean, I don't think dogs are walking around in your homes or apartments thinking, boy, am I confused today. I don't know whether I'm the couch or this. I mean, I just don't think they're confused like that. They clearly know there's a difference between, as it were, the fur at the end of their body and the rest of the world. So if that were the case, that would be the level of self-awareness.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Sir, perhaps you could help me with a question I have about the individual rights trumping the
Right.
society. This has nothing to do with animals directly, but the developer called Portrait Homes cut down 24 cypress trees on a former golf course next to us. And they can always say, well, it's our trees. Our trees, we can cut.
Right.
That is individual rights
Right.
that trumps the rights of society to enjoy the trees, for birds to enjoy the trees. For the trees to help with drainage, with shading, with coolness and so forth. Can you throw some light on how I could respond to that?
Right. The context in which I talked about respect for individual rights trumping the general good, the context in which what was being done to individuals who had rights involved assaults on their body, deprivations of their freedom, or the taking of their life. You know, those are the contexts in which I was talking about. So that context, I think, doesn't easily translate to the context that you're talking about, because the context you're talking about is not the context in which the individuals are having their bodies and so on and so on. It does present a problem, though, obviously, and it's interesting that you bring this up, because if you know, the rights that I talked about throughout were the rights to bodily integrity, rights to life, rights to liberty, freedoms. I never talked about the rights to property. And if you include rights to property in those fundamental rights that trump the public good, then you're going to have the cypress guy winning the day. If you're going to say that rights to property don't trump the public good, I mean, they're rights, all right, but they're, if you like, defeasible. They can be overridden because of public interest, which would be my inclination. Then you could have an answer to that. But I think the right to property is not in the same category as the right to life, right to liberty, right to bodily integrity.
It's pretty much majority opinion that experimentation for cosmetics and
Right.
stuff like that is
Right.
immoral, but how do you feel about experimenting for
Right.
this cause? Or
Okay, the question is about, everybody, lots of people say the using animals for test cosmetics is wrong and we shouldn't do that. And we should make it a point to go out and buy products that have not been tested on animals because the marketplace is full of products like that. And there's no hardship to use Body Shop products than to use L'Oreal, for example. But the question is about, what about important medical research? And that's a very difficult question, obviously. Very difficult question. That I'm not going to be able to answer satisfactorily with the few words I have here. So let me encourage you to do two things. One would be to go online to a group called PCRM.org, PCRM.org. And that stands for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And these are physicians, medical doctors, who are going against the grain of their peers and who are arguing against biomedical research on animals. Not on moral grounds, but on medical grounds. And the same is true of an author who I commend to your attention, who's a medical doctor, named Ray Greek, and Greek is spelled like the Greeks, Ray Greek, G-R-E-E-K. And just go into Amazon.com, see his books. And he's, again, a very forceful spokesperson for people within the medical establishment, making the following argument, that research that relies on animals as models is harmful to human beings, all considered. So if what we're trying to do is to find a research model that is most beneficial to us, they think that would be to use alternatives other than animals. But those are the experts. Those are the ones I encourage you to see.
Well, you just dying to ask one more?
I have a question about, as far as animal rights go. If animals have rights, how would you respond to, say, like a lion or a carnivorous animal killing another animal for suffices dietary needs? Would that be a violation of the praise rights? Or
Okay.
how would that?
Very good question, and here's the way I think about that question anyhow. Remember when we talked about moral responsibility, and we said in the context of rights, some people think you have to be morally responsible in order to have rights. And we stop and we think about what's involved in moral responsibility, and moral responsibility involves at least being able to think about, is this right or is this wrong? And then choosing to act on one's own volition. So that's why you are morally responsible, because you can think about what's right and what's wrong and then choose to act on your own volition. That's why I'm morally responsible, because I can do the same things. But in the case of the lion and the wildebeest, if you think of it in those terms, I have no reason to think that the lion is sitting there in the Serengeti thinking, is this right or is this wrong? I just don't think that lions and tigers and bears think in those terms. And because they don't think in those terms, then I don't think it's accurate or correct to think of them as being morally responsible for what they do.